The Executive Playbook in proud association with Hennessy XO. Each drop is an odyssey.
They move and shake, they turn dreams into reality. They steer the ship and really shape our trajectory. But what lessons can us mere mortals learn from the prominent leaders of today, and what do they reflect on? What inspires them? What moves them to disrupt the status quo? They do think differently from the rest of us. Well, accomplished architect, thought leader, and creative powerhouse Mokena Mokeka gives new weight to the word visionary. He's got so much global experience, an extensive list of accomplishments and qualifications which have seen him take his place as a global luminary through the World Economic Forum and other institutions, but a wealth of experience built on a passion for social justice and, critically, storytelling for our purposes today, which is what really sets him apart. Grew up in Maseru, then formed and shaped in New York. Is it an exile story? What is the story?
A bit of both. So my father was in the diplomatic corps for Lesotho, and he served as ambassador to the United States and to the UN at different times. So we were both in DC as well as in New York for a while.
How many years of this?
Well, almost from baby till about 12 years old. Yeah. So.
And that's really formative. I mean, the hustle and the bustle. DC is monuments and big open boulevards.
Yeah.
New York City is congested and vibey and exciting.
Absolutely.
and wild.
Absolutely. Huge contrast. So what I remember most about DC, and that's when my younger brother was also born, was just the boulevards, the big buildings. Lincoln Memorial was like one of the most fantastic spaces. I think I must have been 3 or 4, but I still remember, standing in front of that, gargantuan statue. So we didn't stay directly in Manhattan. We stayed just outside in a town called New Rochelle. So that was partly, suburban life, but it was definitely New York. And at the same time, my dad was obviously at the UN. So, every now and again, coming in to see the big buildings, the World Trade Center, and it was the rise of hip hop. So it was also a beautiful but really complex time to be there because the 80s were pretty tough economically. So there was this really interesting tension about being suburban, about being African, but not really understanding what does it mean to be African, because it really wasn't in me. It was in my parents, not in me. My father, who essentially at the time he was really involved in terms of trying to stop apartheid. So in the UN, he was one of the key people to talk about sanctions going as far back as 1978, talking to Carter, etc. It took many years for sanctions to happen, and he'd come home super frustrated, talking about this ambassador said no and this one. And at that time, there was no voice for, let's say, Black South Africans in the UN. So between the neighboring countries and the non-aligned movement, there was this huge weight on them to try and get apartheid to be stopped. So I was growing up as a kid with this abstract problem, which I hadn't fully internalized, but aware that it was a huge problem because our life was obsessed with this issue of justice.
Yet you, to all intents and purposes, are more American than anything else because you're growing up in this culture. You're growing up in this environment.
Yeah, it was tricky. It was tricky. I mean, so I don't know if you know, if you grow up in the US, at least at that time, you have to do the Pledge of Allegiance every day. So in the morning, you get up 8 o'clock, I pledge allegiance, to the flag. And so I really thought I was American. People would remind me I wasn't because of my name. My nickname even became Kenny after a Kenny Rogers song because people refused to say Mokena. So I was in this weird space where people always telling me who I was, and I couldn't reconcile who I was. And even at home, I think my parents did their best to inculcate African values, but parents can raise you, but if you're in a different society.
Your peers define you, though. Your peers,
exactly.
You either have good friends or bad friends. You're either in trouble or not in trouble.
That's also true. That's also true.
Talk to me about the early days of hip-hop and that influence.
Wow. Well, I mean, what can I say? So it's so mainstream now. It's very difficult to explain that it was such an obscure, niche, almost secret society. What I mean by that is that hip-hop was not cool for a long time. You couldn't see it on TV. Nightclubs weren't playing. And I remember we'd be driving sometimes to visit my dad, and Hot 97 would play some hip hop, and then the driver would quickly switch it off. And my dad would be like, that's not good music. So early 80s, and being a young person, part of that sort of wave, it was really, really amazing. I remember, so I was on the school bus, just like the proper yellow school bus, and I was in the back seat. And there was an MC, her name was Roxanne Shante. She was a female MC. She was coming up and she had a hit. I think I repeated 2 or 3 lines that she had said, and the whole bus went quiet. And they're like, what was that? And I did it again.
Well, what did it sound like?
I don't remember. I mean, early rap was very, very, very basic. I think I made a rap about, there was a song called Roxanne, Roxanne. That was a chorus.
I'm not feeling it though.
I'm not going to rap now. That's what you're trying to do. Unless you beatbox.
If I had any rhythm, I would, and I don't. So let's pretend I'm beatboxing and you can rap.
It was so basic. I must have been 7 years old. But the point was, it was the first time that people saw me. Does that make sense?
Because you were so trying. I mean, I don't know if you were consciously at that moment trying to fit in, or whether you just liked the rap and you delivered it.
I was trying to fit in, but I just liked the rap, so I just delivered it.
And suddenly they went, oh, he's not different.
And then it's like, I did it again. Then the bus said, he can rap. And then
I don't believe it for a moment.
It's okay. It's fine. I mean,
I'll take you at your word.
We were kids. You know, the level of let's call it intelligence around 7-year-olds deciding whether you can rap or not is very limited. But it was the first. What I loved about hip hop was that it was an assertion of identity. It gave, for people who felt displaced by society, something to land in, and I latched on it as an African there. So I just used to love rapping because
and then
that gave me credibility.
The huge adoption of hip hop in South Africa. Enormous.
Yeah, very. But you know, it wasn't perfect. I got to tell you. So I started studying at UCT '94, and at that time, Kwaito was big. And I'd been rapping for years. I'd done stuff. And then I remember we were performing at Jammy Stairs. People started throwing bottles. What is this? What is this? You know. So I was totally shocked because the whole culture at that time was still heavily into Kwaito. It hadn't made that transition. Yeah. I was wearing my Timberland boots, and people said, "Why is he wearing construction shoes?" Because at that time it was, soft leather shoes with slick hair and Italian shirts. So between '94 and pretty much '98. It was about a 3 or 4 year period before hip hop became cool here. Even here, it felt I was an outlier again, all over again.
But have you ever fit in? I mean, it was really hard to fit in. Have you ever felt like you belonged anywhere?
It's a very tricky question. There are cities that I love. Let's put it this way. I love Cape Town. And of all the cities I've been to in my life, I'd probably say this is my closest to my home. I feel comfortable here, I feel good here, but at the same time, we know it's still a divided city, it's still a very difficult city. So there are places where I have been made to feel uncomfortable here, no question. Lesotho, definitely a place where it's culture, it's heritage, it's the bigger narrative, but also very uncomfortable there. You don't have quite the right accent. I don't speak Sesotho with the exact same perfection and diction of my family, and it stands out. And obviously my experiences, I like pizza, I like hamburgers, I like meatball wedges, I like pasta. So even just cuisine is like...
You gotta like Papa Morojo, and if you don't...
Papa Morojo is good, but then I'd rather have grilled meat than a whole thing of papa, right? So I've never really actually, and I think I've kind of accepted that's my condition, is that I'll be semi-comfortable in any place, but never fully comfortable in any place.
But isn't that also useful? As an artist, as an architect, as an artist, you can redefine spaces based on a multiplicity of experiences. You're not part of any one place.
It is. It's super useful depending on how it's received. So, for example, I'm seen as a disruptor in certain conditions because I always come in and I see things from a different point of view. That can be very, very useful in certain settings, whether it's either academically, making new friends, professionally, as an architect. But there are some places which are conservative, and people want familiarity from you. And if they don't get it, you can find that you can't get as much traction as you want. But on the whole, I'm super grateful for this sort of ambidextrous, ambiguous way of navigating through life, because I make friends quickly, I get people, I've built my empathy tools. I don't have this sort of prejudice of difference. Like I just love people anywhere around the world, and it might make me seem naive at times because I might be very open to things, but it's deliberate. It's about being open and just acknowledging that the universe is complex.
The Executive Playbook in association with Hennessy XO, celebrating personal and business success.
The Executive Playbook in proud association with Hennessy XO. Each drop is an odyssey.
Talk to me about architecture. I mean, your biggest project that you were involved in one time in the past was Cape Town Convention Centre, one of the loneliest and emptiest places in the world right now. I mean,
that is the nature of convention centres. They have a very interesting life cycle, but yeah.
Absolutely, and hopefully it gets filled up with warm bodies again.
Yeah.
But you've kind of moved on from pure architecture. I mean, you're now in consulting and all sorts of interesting things.
Absolutely. I mean, that journey, it might seem sudden to other people, but it's actually been continuous over, let's say, last 5 or 6 years. So I've been involved in various forms of leadership, the Desmond Tutu Fellowship, Young Global Leader with the World Economic Forum. And in these sort of spaces, it's all about impact. Young Global Leaders are about global impact. Desmond Tutu is about African impact. And being a leader in those spaces and being exposed to all of the issues and the concerns that are there, whether it's from health or climate change or gender equity or dealing with genital mutilation, etc. There's a whole range of issues that we face. Architecture is a wonderful platform to think around those issues because it's a very good analytical tool. But I don't produce architecture when I'm responding to those conversations.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I was chatting to a man called Colin Coleman the other day, who's well known in struggle circles. His dad was a member of parliament in Nelson Mandela's cabinet, a family sort of embedded in resistance to the Nats. Colin went off and did architecture, became the managing director of Goldman Sachs in South Africa for a decade.
There you go.
What is it about the thinking that you learn drawing straight lines on bits of paper with rulers? Forgive me for not appreciating the art.
No, it's okay. It's a very good question. I'll explain.
What is it about architecture that shapes your brain in a way to think about general problem solving?
We have to deal with complexity. Now, what that means is that a line on a piece of paper is an image. It is a legal statement to a contractor about what must happen. It is a political statement because a fence can separate two countries. It can separate a house. It can demarcate where you don't move. So there's politics around what a line is. A door is when you allow those two things to intersect. So you're designing a hospital. It could, that line could define a line of safety or not safety. A line can define where you say this community doesn't interact with this community. So architecture is subjected to, I'm not going to say the word attacks, but critiques by anything ranging from sociologists to the client who's paying for it, to the builder who needs to put it together, to the person who has to maintain it. And when we think about that, we have to think in holistic systems. So what I found is very useful about it is we don't think in buckets. We have to see the bigger picture. When I do a building, I'm not just thinking of where does the client want the view to the bedroom. I'm thinking about, does it stand up? I'm thinking about, in winter, will it be cold? I'm thinking, is it going to rain here? Is it in shadow? So every answer I give is layered with so many considerations, and I have to pick what is right for this particular person. So if I'm doing a pitch, I'll say, well, it looks like this, and we're using wood, etc. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, what's the carbon footprint? Yeah. How is it going to be built? Is there a local labor force that can put this together? So that level of complexity that you go through 6 years of study to create buildings is very useful when you're dealing with complex problems. I mean, we were involved in discussions recently around assisting the Tanzanian government about their tax incentives for carbon credits. And I'm one of the leads there. I'm not a tax expert, But we were able to illustrate that, if you have too high a tax on this growing industry, the communities on the ground who would benefit from a carbon tax regime, or let's call it a carbon economy that's coming out of the recent climate change accords because of capital coming in from abroad into Africa, they would probably be penalized. So we advised the government of Tanzania, please don't tax this new sector, at least for the first couple of years until it grows, because otherwise the community won't benefit. Now, that analysis comes from understanding of a system, that there's capital coming from, a philanthropist in the United States who wants to invest in carbon. You have a government that's trying to build its economy. You have a community that's in need of job creation. My ability to stretch those things is because of architecture.
So much of what we need needs to be redesigned.
Yeah.
Our society needs to be redesigned. Our economy needs to be redesigned. Our buildings that were built for, a tiny proportion of the population need to be redesigned. I mean, you are still involved, I think, in some of the thinking around redesign. Like
absolutely.
Station, for example, which I don't know when last you went through there. It's not a happy place.
It's not a happy place. I actually commented a couple of months ago, I thought, on my socials that one of the problems that we have as South Africans is we underinvest in maintenance. Like the assumption that a building will last forever. In the same way that you have to wake up and wash in the morning and if you don't brush your teeth, you're going to get plaque. Buildings are the same if you don't paint them. So I think that particular building has suffered from just underinvestment and so on. I am very much involved in the design space, but I'm also doing work across the continent in design. So I'm doing a project now in Gabon where we're going to possibly be doing probably the tallest mass timber structure on Africa. The UN is the client, and that building should hopefully start conversations about public buildings being made out of wood as opposed to concrete and steel because it's better for the planet. So I will always be a designer, but I'm not so sure about the opportunities right now in Cape Town. It's a bit of a tough space for avant-garde design in Cape Town, I would say, in the public sector. Private is different,
yeah. I mean, there's some extraordinary structures.
Yeah.
When you look at residential structures, people have done amazing things.
Yeah.
But it's quite you've got to say, you've got to whisper it.
I know what you mean. It's tricky. Capital is conservative. Capital doesn't want to stand out. Capital is like, if you want to boast to your friends about the house that you've got and it's really, really amazing. I think South Africans want to fit in. So we have a tendency to say, if someone did that and it's good, then I want the same one. We don't have capital that says, that's amazing, do something for me that's entirely about me. And I think it has to do with, we're still learning how to be fully expressive human beings. It's part of our history.
The Executive Playbook in association with Hennessy XO, celebrating personal and business success.
The Executive Playbook in proud association with Hennessy XO. Each drop is an odyssey.
I hate talking about COVID as an opportunity, but it is a massive dislocation in the same way as the Spanish flu, the World
Absolutely.
Wars, the end of apartheid. Dislocations that change the social order. Does COVID potentially change that structure and social order as you see it in this city?
Completely. Going back to plagues, whether it's the first one from Justinian or even the so-called Black Plague in the 1400s, they fortunately always precede amazing renewal. So when economists and cities understand that this is a chance to reset, some amazing things can happen. We're already seeing that in digital services and digital finance. The amount of businesses that have sprung up online, etc., during this period are phenomenal. Mind you, other sectors have suffered, so it's not as if it's...
but it does tend to cast out the old, and you've got sectors that are holding on for dear life, and this just quickly euthanizes them, and people move on.
Absolutely.
They don't want to make the decision themselves, have got to be pushed. They get pushed into extinction and have to reinvent themselves.
Absolutely. Now, and you see that whether it's in restaurants, now delivering food differently. You're seeing that in the way that companies are having to restructure their employment models to allow much more remote working and not penalize it. You're seeing it in also people saying, well, if I make something in my backyard and I've got an Instagram account and I've got Twitter, I can actually sell products.
I can reach markets.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, our industrialization model has shifted from the notion of a CBD, a suburb, an industrial hub, to the home being the industry, the place of sale, and the place of business.
Back to the Middle Ages.
Yeah, but it's not a bad thing. Actually, the cities that we love globally, when we take our photos, are those ancient cities, whether it's in Europe or Milan or the UK, cities where you can go outside and grab a cup of coffee and get some food, and the granny's making something. It's mixed.
But they're integrated spaces where
exactly.
you don't have to get into your car. I mean, South Africa in distance, boy, we do love to drive to a mall. And it's grotesque in many ways.
Yeah, it's grotesque, but also it's just not good. Just not good economics, because what a mall does is that it, by taking a bit of the money from all of these different tenants, right, which gets hived off, and it does its thing, and you provide safety and you provide all the amenities. The reality is that if you have a city where you have a high street and that's functional, that capital gets distributed and actually creates more jobs. So we're probably losing anything between 5 to 15% of the amount of money that could be creating more work, because it's getting sucked up by these vacuum cleaners.
But you take money out of communities.
Yes, that's exactly the point.
So local economies can't exist in a healthy way. If you could redesign, I mean, our president, one of his first speeches when he became president, he spoke people laughed at him because he was speaking about bullet trains and smart cities, and people said the only bullets are the ones people shoot into trains, and smart cities.
I remember the reaction to that.
You must be kidding, because he was just he needed a bit more time before making that speech, I think, to build a vision.
Yeah.
But if you could design it for him, if you could say to him, you want a smart city? If you could redesign it, what would it look like?
Well, what I'm going to say is probably going to be a bit controversial. The one is, first off, design with what you have. Like it's such an, if you think of Joburg CBD and how many, there's almost a capital flight, for various reasons. But if you say, actually, let's reinvest in these existing assets, these existing roads and this, let's think about these buildings differently that have been hijacked, et cetera, et cetera. How do we make it more inclusive? The net effect can be far much more substantial. So it's like almost saying to New York, okay, you've got all these challenges in Manhattan, make another Manhattan. It's nonsensical. You'd rather fix what you have. You wouldn't tell London to go elsewhere. You wouldn't tell Tokyo. You'd fix what you have. So we as South Africans have to stop looking for a hinterland where we can escape our problems and find another estate that's another 60 kilometers out of town. Because I think that if we make smart cities around the cities that we currently have, it'll be fantastic. Secondly, we have what we call secondary cities. These are cities like Grahamstown and other sorts of places which are somewhat forgotten, right? They don't have enough opportunities.
Somewhat forgotten is the understatement. I don't know when last you were in Makanda, but it's not a happy place. No. I mean, you look at how Clover's moved out of Lichtenburg, and you look at Astral Foods and Standerton and that municipality around there, where they're having to sue government to get basic services.
It's insane.
Because there are 180 municipalities in the country that are dysfunctional.
Exactly.
Maybe being smart is just getting places working as a first step.
That's exactly my point.
For citizens, for people.
Exactly, because it's very easy for me to say, let's find some fallow land somewhere and create some. I just know it's irresponsible. I mean, it might satisfy my aesthetics ego to have these. We have to fix the PEs. We have to fix our middle cities. We have to get developers to get them to reinvest. They have to make it. We have to incentivize it for them and make our existing cities smart. And then we can have a conversation about moving forward. You look at a city like Singapore, one of the cities that I love so much. It's a dense city. There are whole reasons why it's done so well, but they're so strict about protecting their natural resources. They're very explicit. They say, this is where we are. You can go as high as you want, but it's to protect nature. Now, we don't have that attitude. We have this idea that we can. The more we as South Africans say, these are our cities, we are blessed with Table Mountain, we're blessed with this, we need to go up because we can't go out horizontally. And then that will trigger a whole other conversation about efficiency, smartness, the amount of people per square kilometer, the amount of money you spend per square meter becomes more efficient, so you'll have better services. At the moment, our money is distributed, so no wonder we have potholes everywhere, because if you take the tax base and then divide it on the surface area, it's quite low. When people are dense, there's enough money to fix those potholes. So we're not getting the economic argument right and the spatial planning argument right, and people are doing their own thing. And that's why we have dysfunctional cities.
Thanks so much indeed for chatting to us. Thank you for
It's
bringing
always a pleasure. 2 years. I miss talking to you, my friend.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
good.
It's nice to catch up, and you've done a lot in 2 years.
I've transitioned. I've also been part of these people who've had to take restock of my profession as a profession versus my training. And there's a difference. So I've kept my training, but I've moved from my profession.
The Executive Playbook in association with Hennessy XO, celebrating personal and business success.